unfortunately, we have to get our acts together very soon. Now, the nicest way actually to summarize what we have learned since the last IPCC report and what we have learned in the latest IPCC report is this paper which was published in PNAS. I think Hans-Martin Füssel, who is one of the authors, is here in the audience from PIC. And this is what was called the burning embers diagram. So in a sense, according to 5 reasons of concern, you see on a vertical line, you see global mean temperature increase. And as you move from the white range to the yellow one, finally to the red hot range, you are entering very dangerous terrain. So that is the meaning of it. Now, this is what the European Union has set as a guardrail against global warming, try to confine global warming to no more, maximally 2 degrees above pre-industrial level. And you see, in the 2001 assessment where I was involved, this seems to be still something like a safe level. But look at recent scientific evidence, you see all the red is coming down. So the 2 degrees line now seems to be a very foul compromise. On the other hand, I show you now what it means to hold that line. So Russian roulette, my standard question is, of course, always to the audience, do you know what Russian roulette is? Everybody knows it. The second question is, have you ever played it? And of course, nobody here has ever played it, or maybe somebody. Why don't you do it? I mean, you have a 5 in 6 chance to survive. That's a fair game, I think, because in order to save the planet from a warming which exceeds 2 degrees and to have a 5 in 6 chance to achieve that goal, we need to reduce global emissions by 80% by the year 2050, the global emissions, not the industrialized. And this is hard science. And actually there is a package of publications tomorrow released by Nature. One of them is Mainshausen et al., work done primarily at the Potsdam Institute, Miles Allen from Oxford Universities and others, which will tell us that if we, and that is, I do not have a slide for this, but this is my main message, if you like. If we miss to achieve peaking of global emissions before 2020, you know the emissions still go up, but we have to turn the tide, we have to bend the curve down. But if this peaking happens after 2020, it means that in order to still keep the 2 degrees line, we would have to reduce global emissions every year by 5% or more. And that is one Kyoto protocol every year. But the Kyoto Protocol absolutely was not achieved over 12 years and so on, was not ratified by the United States and so on. So it means achieving 1 Kyoto per year afterwards. If we do not achieve peaking of emissions by 2020, which is very, very likely, so do we give up on climate stabilization? Perhaps. I mean, I'd like to, because I mentioned President Obama, I mean, his official goal so far is stabilizing greenhouse gas emissions in the United States by 2020 at the 1990 level. But it's clearly not good enough. And so the US, Europe, China, and so on are holding the fate of his planet in their hands, but they do not seem to be aware of that. So what can we do? We have to produce the great transformation. That was a Nobel laureate meeting I organized in Potsdam in 2007. And you can actually discern one of our protagonists here, State Secretary Meyer Kramer. So you can find him. He's the 8th person from the right or something like that. So this was the Potsdam Memorandum saying, unless we start, launch, establish, enable a great transformation of our industrial metabolism now, today, we have no chance to stabilize the climate at all. So what would be the instruments? It could be, that's the famous McKinsey curve. How could you increase energy efficiency at negative costs? Actually, on the left-hand side, it means if you improve the insulation of buildings, you will even earn 100 euro, for example, per ton avoided carbon, and so on. So you go through the full list. So this is energy efficiency. The next one is switch our mobility to electromobility as soon as possible. So in 20 years from now, we shouldn't have any combustion engine car on the road, because that would increase the energy efficiency by 70 to 80%. Next one is settlements. Houses can be turned into gadgets that produce energy, net energy, instead of absorb energy, and this could be fed into the grid. These houses exist already, but they are very, very expensive, of course. And finally, my pet project, which is desert solar project. That means you could connect by a super smart grid all the renewable energy sources across Europe and Northern Africa, in particular solar thermal power. The same could be done in China, it could be done in the southwest of the United States, and so on. The technology is there, we can calculate the costs, and so on. It's feasible, it's possible, it's highly attractive, there are no side effects, nobody's doing it. And finally, probably, in order to stabilize the climate, we will not just have to decarbonize our societies by 2050 entirely, we will also have to create negative emissions, that means to remove carbon dioxide again from the atmosphere. That could be done by biosequestration, planting trees, storing carbon, and if you remove the energy from it by burning it, you have to sequester the carbon. That would be the most natural carbon sink we have to create on planet. And this is something which will completely transform agriculture, because agriculture may, to a large extent in the future, produce and manage carbon sinks instead of just producing food and energy. Okay, so we have done a calculation for the German government, the German Advisory Council. These are the regions where you could do on degraded land, actually, without any competition with food production of biodiversity. These are the regions where you could produce up to 100 exajoules of energy. So in order to reduce the fossil fuel emissions, and where you could also do with biosequestration, for example, by using the charcoal in order to ameliorate the soils. So it may be that in the future, when we do this great transformation, it's not just about industry or consumer behavior. It may be that we have to completely change the pattern of land use on this planet. I know this sounds megalomaniac and that sounds absolutely crazy, but the present land use on this planet is clearly suboptimal. And we learned just from the minister here that in China, 22% of the global population are fed with 9% of the arable land. Now, scandalous fact is that more than 2 times of the cropland on this planet, the rangeland is using our resources, where you just have grazing cattle who are turned into hamburgers, for example, in the end. This is one of the biggest luxury on this planet. So land use will have to change. Actually, we did a little calculation at our institute 2 years ago. This is the present use of land on this planet, so agriculture. The greener the pixel is, the more agriculture you have there. And if you would do now a thought experiment, let's say we have 12 billion people to feed on this planet, and we have dietary habits of 1995, so very unhealthy, a lot of hamburgers, sugar, fat, and so on. How much land and what land would we need in order to feed these people? And it turns out, if you optimally distribute agriculture on the planet, it's between 1/5 and 1/3 of the current land. So we can easily feed 12 billion people if we would just switch to optimal agriculture.